I'm Gaurav Chintamnidi. Coming up on Chapman News, universities across the country are confronted with student protests in regards to Israel and Hamas war. Just ahead, I'll talk about a reaction in regards to a controversial speaker we had here on Chapman University's campus.
No estamos felices con lo que nos ofrecen.
Also coming up, hundreds of California janitors are threatening to strike over wages and working conditions after management offers them a raise of just $1. We have the story.
Everything from hot rods to classics. Thousands of vintage car lovers recently gathered in our backyard for the annual car show. We have highlights, plus your weather and sports just ahead.
From Dodge College of Film and Media Arts, this is Chapman News.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Chapman News. I'm Alexandra Cohen-Yartz.
And I'm Gavin Nguyen. We start today with updates on the war in Gaza. The Senate is today discussing a foreign aid package which includes over $26 billion of aid to Israel.
Some preliminary voting is expected this afternoon. The discussion comes after the aid package, which includes aid to Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel, was passed in the House over the weekend with bipartisan support. Lawmakers like Representative Michael McCaul applauded House Speaker Mike Johnson's support for the measure.
But he knows that if we didn't do this, the consequences would have been severe, not just for the United States, but for the free world.
Yesterday, Israel's head of intelligence resigned, the first senior military officer to do so since the war began in October over the weekend. Israel continues its strikes on the southern Gazan city of Rafah. According to AP News, 22 people were killed, 18 of which were children. Columbia University says its classes will be hybrid for the remainder of the semester. Pro-Palestinian protests were seen across campus in the Northeast yesterday in a series of tense standoffs between college administrators and student protesters. At Columbia, dozens of faculty members walked out in solidarity with protesting students who have set up a tent encampment on the campus. Some Jewish students reported they were targeted with verbal anti-Semitic harassment. In New England, protests took place at MIT and at Yale, where 47 people were arrested. Back in New York, over 400 protesters at NYU set up their own encampment yesterday, and the Associated Press reports 133 protesters were arrested by the NYPD. New York Governor Kathy Hochul posted a video on her X account calling out both sides of the protests and asking for compassion.
People need to find their humanity. Have the conversations, talk to each other, understand different points of view, because that's what college students should be doing.
President Biden also commented yesterday, condemning the anti-Semitism that was seen during some protests.
Meanwhile, here on the West Coast, tensions between student protesters and law enforcement flared in Northern California's Humboldt County. School administrators shut down the Cal Poly Humboldt campus yesterday evening after pro-Palestinian protesters occupied an administrative building and refused police orders to leave. Protesters chanted "Free Palestine" and "Cops Go Home" while confronting police officers wearing helmets and holding riot shields. Once protesters entered the building, they vandalized the walls with writing saying "Land Back." This morning, the campus is still locked down and in-person classes were canceled.
Here at Chapman University, a pro-Palestinian speaker was invited to campus. This caused some controversy.
Our Gaurav Chintamnidi talked to campus community members about what happened. He joins us live now with the story.
Thank you, Gavin and Alex. I'm right in front of Memorial Hall, a building here on campus where you can locate the university president's office, as well as other top administrators here on campus as well. Recently, a student organization of the name of Students for Justice in Palestine put together a student speaker event, which caused a lot of controversy here on Chapman University's campus. Let's take a look.
To the governing board of Chapman University, Chapman students and faculty, we at Chapman University Students for Justice in Palestine are calling for a complete and total divestment from all weapon manufacturers and institutions that aid the occupation of Palestine.
The Chapman chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine recently invited Palestinian activist and influencer Maya Abdallah to speak about the Israel-Hamas war. However, several Chapman students reported to campus public safety that they felt, quote, uncomfortable by Abdallah's presence. Public safety then sent an email to the entire Chapman community, noting there would be a buffer zone established between protesting groups. Chapman Peace and Justice Studies professor Lisa Light says she was disappointed by the public safety email.
We've had Nixon on this campus. We've had President Bush. We've had Condoleezza Rice, Schwarzkopf. We've had people who have been called and should be understood as war criminals on our campus, and we've not sent letters like this.
Chapman senior Ethan Oppenheimer, a member of the group Students Supporting Israel, told me why he thinks campus security needed to take extra steps.
The speaker wasn't just your typical Palestinian activist. The speaker has spoken in support of violence against Jews, calling for intifada in the United States and in Gaza.
Just days later, SJP continued their protests, walking out of class and demanding that Chapman divest itself from any interests that support Israel.
We must stand up for those who do not. We must stand up for those.
And this has been kind of a repeated problem we've had on campus with political organizations, and anything we do is the university will always do these kind of fluff emails to kind of cover their behind because of the liability they're worried about.
Rabbi Casey Kale is director of Jewish life at Chapman's Fish Interfaith Center. She says Jewish students have been deeply impacted by the Israel-Hamas war and need support.
There is no one in the land of Israel that doesn't know someone that was killed on October 7th or since. There is no one who doesn't know someone who was taken captive and perhaps still is captive.
I talked to Chapman University's Dean of Student Affairs, Jerry Price, who told me that Chapman University as an institution will provide a safe environment for students while also supporting free speech. I'm Gaurav Chintamnidi reporting live for Chapman News. Now back to you at the desk.
Thank you, Gaurav, for that important report. Google has fired another 20 workers who protested the tech company's contracts with Israel, bringing the total number of fired employees to 50. A group called No Tech for Apartheid organized the protests and responded to the firings in a post on Instagram stating, quote, Google fired 20 additional workers, including non-participants, bystanders who were there during last week's protests. In response, Google issued a statement saying, quote, every single one of those whose employment was terminated was personally and definitively involved in disruptive activity inside our buildings.
The former head of the company that owned the National Enquirer tabloid is back on the witness stand today in former President Trump's criminal trial in Manhattan. Trump is accused of concealing a hush money payment to former adult film star Stormy Daniels. Today, prosecutors called former American media CEO David Pecker back to the stand and questioned him about whether he avoided running negative stories about Trump by buying the rights to the stories and then never publishing them. Pecker testified that the Enquirer did in fact practice checkbook journalism and paid for stories. Prosecutors say Trump made payments to Daniels to prevent a story about their alleged affair from getting out and hurting his chances in the 2016 election. Defense attorney Todd Blanche told the jury yesterday that, quote, there is nothing wrong with trying to influence an election and that there's no proof Trump had any criminal intent. This is the first time a former president has ever been tried in a criminal trial. It's expected to last 6 weeks.
Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson's job seems to be safe despite calls for his ouster by some in his party. Johnson led the way this past weekend as the House passed a bipartisan $95 billion foreign aid package, with $61 billion going directly to Ukraine. Far-right Republicans, including Georgia's Marjorie Taylor Greene, have threatened to force Johnson out. They say he should not be working with Democrats on a foreign aid bill, while U.S. border crises continue. But Johnson does have the support from many in his party, including New York State Representative Mike Lawler.
The Speaker is doing the right thing at the right time for the right reasons.
The House is now on a one-week recess while representatives return to their home districts.
The Orange County cities of Newport Beach, Huntington Beach, and Orange have left a statewide lobbying group because of the organization's support of Proposition 1. Prop 1 was narrowly passed by California voters last month. It authorizes the use of more than $6 billion in bonds to create more housing and drug treatment centers for homeless people. While the measure was narrowly passed by voters statewide, it was rejected by Orange County voters. As a result, city leaders in Newport Beach, Huntington Beach, and Orange voted to leave the California League of Cities, which supports Prop 1. Supporters of the proposition say a new approach is needed to address the state's homelessness crisis. Leah Smith works at Catholic Worker Community Shelter in Santa Ana. She's not sure why OC voters would reject Prop 1, but says often people don't understand the need for a community response to homelessness.
There has been always a desire for somebody else to do it, make it somebody else's problem, not mine. We've done enough.
Critics say Prop 1 reduces local funding control and could lead to more problematic group homes in California counties. Our coverage of homelessness in California continues as the state of California is giving more than $3 million to the city of Anaheim to move people currently living in homelessness encampments along the 91 freeway to shelters. The money will be used to build a new shelter that will house up to 75 people. California is awarding nearly $200 million in funding to various communities around the state to address homeless encampments located near freeways. Anaheim is the only city in Orange County to receive the funding.
I'm Luis Avila. Let's take a look at weather headlines for today. First up, wetlands. We'll talk about the importance of our local wetlands and how one group is working to restore them. Also, we have a very strong marine layer these past few days and still to come. I'll tell you about how long that'll last, and I'll have the rest of your forecast coming up next.
If you're a vintage car fan, then the Orange Plaza near the campus of Chapman was the place to be this past weekend. That story coming up after a short break. Stay tuned.
I'm Gavin Nguyen, live here at the Orange County Registrar of Voters here in Santa Ana, where coming up, I'll have a preview of this year's primary election.
This might look like a simple bus bench at first glance, but homeless advocates say there's something much more cynical hiding in plain sight. I'm Luis Avila, and I'll have that story coming up.
And we have a sneak peek of the newly expanded Hilbert Museum celebrating Californian art. Those stories plus your weather and sports all ahead here on Chapman News.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Chapman News. I'm Tess Martinelli.
And I'm Tegan Callie. We are 1 week away from Super Tuesday, the day where California and 14 other states will be voting in primary elections.
Chapman News reporter Gavin Nguyen is live in Santa Ana to tell us more.
Thanks, Tegan and Tess. Things are relatively quiet here at the Registrar of Voters, but in just a week's time on Super Tuesday, you can expect a lot more activity. Now, recently, Californians have been getting plenty of information in the mail, including ballots, voter guides just like these, using ballot drop boxes like the one here behind me, all in preparation for Super Tuesday. Voters in California will be deciding who will be on the ballot for key races in November's general election, including the race to fill Senator Dianne Feinstein's Senate seat. Feinstein died last year after serving 31 years in office. The frontrunners include 3 Democrats, current congressional representatives Katie Porter, Adam Schiff, and Barbara Lee, as well as Republican Steve Garvey, a former Dodgers All-Star. The 3 top Democrats have pledged to not accept corporate PAC money, a move that Claremont McKenna College professor Jack Pitney says is meant to appeal to voters' concerns over corporate influence.
People are very concerned about corporate influence on public policy, about the inordinate influence of the wealthy, and foregoing corporate PAC money is a way, symbolically anyway, of appealing to that sentiment.
This is the first time Lee and Schiff have rejected corporate PAC money, while Porter has never accepted funds from corporations in her short congressional career. Pitney, however, says the move does little to ultimately remove corporate interests from public policy.
If you are foregoing PAC money, that doesn't necessarily mean you're foregoing money contributed by individual executives or shareholders in a corporation.
According to the Federal Election Commission, Schiff has raised over $30 million, $6 million of which come from individual contributions of more than $2,000. Porter's campaign has raised $28 million and has taken about $1.5 million from the same category.
In the end, it's very hard to avoid some kind of contributions with people with some kind of economic interest, because practically everybody has some kind of economic interest in issues that a potential senator is going to vote on.
Regardless of party, the 2 candidates with the most votes on Super Tuesday will face off in November's general election. Races for seats in the House have also been heating up in recent weeks. Porter currently represents California's District 47, which includes parts of Irvine, Huntington Beach, and Costa Mesa. Democrats Dave Min and Joanna Weiss and Republican Scott Baugh are among the candidates looking to take over that seat. Campaigning in this race has been particularly intense recently, with Weiss mailing out copies of the police report from Min's DUI arrest last year. Here in Orange, the city is split between 2 congressional districts, Districts 40 and 46. In District 40, incumbent Young Kim, a Republican, is being challenged by 2 Democrats, while in District 46, Longtime incumbent Democrat Lou Correa is defending his seat from David Pan, a Republican from Irvine. Also on the ballot, Proposition 1, aimed at addressing California's homelessness crisis, and a recall election for 2 members of the Orange Unified School District Board. You'll hear about both of those stories later in today's newscast. Now, voting by mail and early voting are well underway at this point, but if you are planning on voting in person on Super Tuesday, just remember lines are going to be closing at 8 p.m. on Tuesday, March 5th. Reporting live here in Santa Ana for Chapman News, I'm Gavin Nguyen. Back to you.
Thanks, Gavin. Republican voters in Michigan are heading to the polls today to pick their choice to take on President Biden in the general election. Former President Trump is leading Nikki Haley by nearly 60 points, according to a new 538 poll. The winner of today's primary will take 16 of Michigan's delegates. The other 39 will be awarded to the winner of a caucus that's being held on Saturday. Even with a decisive loss in her home state of South Carolina to the former president over the weekend, Haley says she is determined to stay in the race.
And we're headed to the Super Tuesday states throughout all of next week. We'll keep fighting for America, and we won't rest until America wins.
The Democratic primary is also being held today, where President Biden is projected to win. This comes despite an effort by Democratic Congresswoman Ratisha Tlaib asking Democrats to vote uncommitted on their ballot to protest President Biden's support of Israel.
Following a lawsuit alleging a violation of the California Voting Rights Act, the city of Cypress is now in the process of redistricting. But concerns from residents have made the process anything but simple. Cypress is about to change the way it elects its city council. Instead of at-large members, there will be 5 districts. Council members will have to live in the district they represent. The decision comes nearly 2 years after a lawsuit that claimed the city's at-large voting system disenfranchised Asian Americans. The city denied the claim, but council member David Burke says the voluntary shift to bi-district voting is the best choice.
Given that almost any time an expert looks for racially polarized voting, they find it, there's good reason to believe that they would find it in Cypress as well.
Working with consultants, Cypress is now tasked with creating 5 districts that are clear, equitable, and non-discriminatory. Burke says that one goal is to keep together communities of interest, which are described as neighborhoods or regions with shared values, culture, or geography.
I want people to feel like their district is their neighborhood and the surrounding area they live in is their district, and make sure that a district isn't spread all the way across the city.
Residents have been encouraged to draw and submit maps for consideration. However, several residents at a public hearing earlier this month shared concerns about the map drawing process.
Come on, this is not right. You're not making it easy for people to do, and a lot of people don't have computers.
I'm pretty young and I'm pretty tech savvy, but I will tell you that online tool is not easy to figure out. I ended up submitting, I believe, 9 or 10 maps, all of which were hand-drawn.
The proposed districts were announced. Here is an image of the draft. If approved, the districts will go into effect for the November election of 2 new city council members. President Biden says that he is hopeful that there will be a ceasefire in Gaza by next week. If an agreement is reached, there would reportedly be a 6-week stop to fighting, which would allow hundreds of trucks into Gaza to deliver supplies. Previously, it was believed Israel planned to launch a ground offensive in Gaza's southern city of Rafah if the remaining Israeli hostages were not freed by Ramadan, which is on March 10th. But Israel now reportedly has said it would release some high-profile Palestinian prisoners in exchange for the return of the Israeli hostages.
One of the measures Californians will vote on next week is State Proposition 1, also known as treatment, not tents. The proposition would move more than $6 billion to address the homeless crisis by expanding the state's mental health and drug abuse services. Part of the proposal is to build more than 10,000 inpatient and residential treatment beds across the state. The rest of the funding will be reserved for housing homeless veterans. Those opposing Prop 1 say moving funds from Mental Health Service Act of 2004 will hurt existing community-based mental health services. There's another vote on the ballot that's getting a lot of attention. Chapman News reporter Alexandra Konyarts has the story of a controversial school board recall election happening right here in our backyard.
These are the signs you have most likely seen out on many street corners, homes, and even small businesses in the city of Orange, encouraging residents to either vote yes or no in the March 5th recall election. Supporters want to have 2 Orange Unified School Board members, Madison Miner and Rick Ledesma, removed. Darshan Small-Alden is an OUSD parent and the chief organizer of the recall committee. She says it all started after a January 5th, 2023 school board meeting, during which the board fired the district's superintendent without explaining why.
That was kind of where the recall began, and that was over a year ago, and since then things have only gotten worse, and so that's how we got the momentum to get this on the ballot.
OUSD recall committee members include parents, community members, and teachers. They say Ledesma and Miner have been on a power grab that is fostering a culture of chaos in the district.
We lost a quarter of our principals in about 4.5 months. And that's a big deal. Most of them were elementary school principals, and those campuses really count on that one specific person.
But opponents say it is the recall supporters who are making the power grab. They maintain that Miner and Ledesma are protecting parents' rights. Miner was elected in November 2022, giving the school board a conservative majority. She calls herself a parent, not a politician.
You know, parents getting that opportunity and making sure that they hold that opportunity to be the #1 advocates for their kids was very important to me.
Last fall, the OUSD board passed a controversial parental notification policy. It requires schools to tell parents and guardians if their child decides to identify as a different gender. Recall supporter Small-Alden believes the decision was made to create a distraction.
At the top, we don't trust them anymore, so now we spend all of this time evaluating what they've done. What is this new policy? What does it mean? Whereas before, you didn't have to pay attention because you believed that the people that were running the district had our best interest at heart, and our students' best interest at heart.
As you can see here, signs both supporting and opposing the recall are often seen side by side, further showing the growing political divide in this community. This is Alexandra Konyarts for Chapman News.
If the recall is approved, the board has a few options, including leaving the seats open until the November election, calling a special election before then, or appointing an interim board of members.
Republican state lawmakers in Alabama are moving to protect access to IVF after a court there decided embryos have the same rights as children and people can be liable for destroying them. After 3 couples undergoing IVF treatment lost their embryos in an accident, the Alabama Supreme Court ruled IVF providers can be sued for wrongful death. The court's decision was also controversial because the judge issuing it used Bible quotes and cited religious beliefs. As a result of the ruling, many IVF clinics in Alabama have halted their services and changed their consent forms.
Coming up next on Chapter bill in Sacramento is getting a lot of attention. We'll tell you how a California lawmaker wants to force drivers to slow down.
That's not how human beings who are suffering from abject poverty should be treated.
Also coming up, our Luis Avila has a special report on hostile architecture. He'll explain the controversy involving some OC bus benches. I'm Alexandra Konyarts. Curious as to what has been causing all of these California winter storms? I will have an answer to that coming up, as well as your weekly weather forecast.
We start with breaking news, a massive fire at the former Tustin Air Base. Firefighters continue to battle the fire, which has heavily damaged a historic landmark.
The fire started overnight. Chapman News reporter Alexandra Konyarts joins us live now in Tustin with the latest.
That's right, Kate and Emily. Now, the massive fire at the North Blimp hangar started early this morning. The historic landmark was built 81 years ago during World War II. Now, the Orange County Fire Authority says that the best way to deal with the fire is to actually let the building collapse, which, as you can see right behind me, has already happened to a majority of the roof on the building. This will allow for crews to go in and fight the fire more efficiently.
OCFA reports that the fire started around 1:30 a.m. More than 70 firefighters have been working tirelessly to contain the fire. The hangar is a former Tustin Air Base and significant part of Orange County's military history. The hangar is 17 stories high, more than 1,000 feet long, and 300 feet wide. According to the city, it is one of the largest wooden structures ever built. The hangar has also been featured in films such as The X-Files and Pearl Harbor. It housed 12 blimps during World War II. For residents such as Thomas Rubio, the news this morning was devastating.
I've been able to go inside the hangars a few times, so it's pretty surreal knowing that probably won't be able to go, especially in this one, go inside of them anymore. I just hope they do something to save the south hangar, because that one's still good, so hopefully they can.
As of now, it remains unclear how the fire started. No injuries have been reported, and the south hangar remains intact. OCFA Fire Chief Brian Fennessy says that it is a sad day for the city. He says that it is unclear how long the fire will last, that it could be several hours or even go into the coming days. OCFA urges all residents to keep their windows closed and to stay away from the area. Officials are currently investigating what has caused this devastating fire. This is Alexandra Konyarts reporting live. Back to you at the desk.